was a crisp morning, the sun just peeking over the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields. A farmer named Luke stood at the edge of his pasture, watching something unfold that would change his life forever. Just beyond the fence, a herd of wild deer grazed. They were beautiful, majestic creatures caught in a rhythm as old as the land itself. But then, without warning, the fence that had stood for years began to tremble. The old wood creaked, splintered, and then gave way with a shocking crack. The deer darted through the breach in a flurry of hooves and panic, their graceful escape turning into a chaotic dash. Luke's heart raced. He knew this was no ordinary day. The breach wasn't just a break in the fence. It was the beginning of a storm he couldn't have imagined. As the last of the deer scampered away into the dense woods beyond, Luke felt a sensation wash over him, a mix of dread and determination. He was already behind them, but what lay on the other side of that fence was more than just wilderness. He hurried to fix the splintered wooden posts, his mind racing. The fence had protected his farm, his crops, and it had kept his livestock safe from dangers that lurked beyond. But now, those very dangers were free. It wasn't just deer that could betray the safety of his land. There were wolves, hungry coyotes, and even the threat of wild boars, each carrying the weight of an unpredictable outcome. Luke felt a chill run down his spine. The real question was whether he could rebuild that barrier before the chaos of the outside world felt the urge to invade. The sun climbed higher in the sky, its rays illuminating the field, but they did nothing to ease his worries. With every swing of his hammer, every driven nail, he thought of the crops that stood ready to be harvested, the fruits of his labor hanging in the balance. Each ear of corn, each row of tomatoes felt like it was trembling, waiting for that first sign of aggression from the wild. Suddenly, a low growl shattered the calm of morning. Luke paused, hammer halfway to the nail, eyes darting toward the woods. In that moment, every muscle in his body tensed. The sound rolled through the air like thunder at a distance, and he knew the wild had taken notice of that breach. Something dangerous was roaming the thin line where civilization met wilderness. With a surge of adrenaline, he grabbed a sturdy pitchfork, gripping its handle like a lifeline. He stepped cautiously toward the edge of his property, heart pounding like a war drum. But what could a pitchfork do against the powers of nature? Luke's mind was a storm, now a battle between fear and responsibility. He had to protect what was his, even if it meant staring into the eyes of a predator. He took a deep breath and emerged from the sanctuary of his fields, stepping onto ground where he was outnumbered. He had ventured into the unknown, a place where instincts ruled over reason. As he crept closer to the fence, his eyes widened. Shadows began to move among the trees, shapes emerging that made his pulse quicken. It wasn't just a few deer wandering absent-mindedly. It was the real chaos that lay lurking just beyond the reach of safety. A wolf stepped into the light, its eyes glinting with an intelligence that sent a shiver down Luke's spine. He had seen wolves before, roaming far from the reach of human settlement, but this was different. This was no mere animal. It was a creature driven by hunger, instinct, a predator drawn to opportunity. And now, that opportunity was right there in his pasture. The wolf's growl reverberated once more, followed by the rustle of leaves as more joined its side. Luke's heart raced. This was a pack, a family unit, a force in unity. They were beautifully fierce, but they were also a threat, a primordial symbol of nature's cycle. Each instinct within him screamed to flee, but he stood frozen, caught in a moment of primal confrontation. Could he drive them back? His mind filled with visions of them ripping into the crops he had cared for, the vulnerability of his land hanging by a fragile thread. Love for his home anchored him in place. It was more than just a field. It was his legacy, the sweat of his brow poured into every inch of soil. He had to protect it, no matter the odds. With a deep breath, he raised his pitchfork, feeling it tremble in his grip. The wolf's eyes locked onto his as if sizing him up. There was a long, tense standoff, an invisible line drawn between the wild and the cultivated, ordered and unbidden. As the seconds dragged on, Luke couldn't help but think how much this mirrored life itself, the battles we face and what we own, all resting upon a fragile sticking point between two worlds. And then it happened. A sudden rustling pulled his attention away. In a flash, a curtain of deer rushed back onto the scene, spurred by some primal instinct. Just moments before, they had fled. Now, drawn back by the scent of the very food his land provided and the chaos that unfolded before them, they sprinted headlong, desperate to return. The pack of wolves had their instincts sharpened, the sight of prey igniting a feral frenzy. Luke's heart sank. As the wolves lunged forward, he sprang into action, racing to the fence, yelling at the top of his lungs. Fear transformed into resolve as he thrust the pitchfork toward the air, a futile yet instinctive act of defiance. His voice sliced through the tension, calling the deer back to the safety of the fields. But the chaos was already unleashed. The wolves leaped forward, darting toward the stampede of deer, who acted purely on instinct, desperate to escape that feral grasp. It's a dance every living creature knows too well, the fleeting moment between survival and becoming another's meal. Before Luke's eyes, the once peaceful landscape erupted into a cacophony of sound, a primal symphony of growls, whinnies, and panicked cries. The sun now bore witness to a ballet of life and death, only this time it was far from serene. The deer scattered in all directions, but a few were not fast enough. Luke's heart raced wildly as he watched the wild footwork unfold. He loathed the violence that was usually hidden beneath the surface of the natural world, but he also understood that deep within those wolves lay the same instinct that lived within him, the both beautiful and brutal will to survive. The scene stretched endlessly, as if time itself held its breath. Luke could hardly feel the tremors of the earth beneath him. As the deer escaped into the safety of the fields, it dawned on him that they'd only returned because of that breach. The fence had served its purpose through the years, a barrier shielding his life from chaos. But now, with both predator and prey unleashed, he recognized a humbling truth. Safety often breeds recklessness. In that moment, Luke was overcome by a strange mixture of respect and fear for the wild. He ran back to his property not to wallow in the security of the fence, but to connect with the land he so fiercely protected. He surrounded himself with the essence of his farm, where every crop was a testament to resilience, perseverance, and ultimately the fragility of life. The fence would be mended, the breach repaired, but that day, chaos had shown him an unfiltered glimpse of the world. The delicate balance between civilization and the wild would no longer be invisible. It was a part of his consciousness now. Every hoof print across that earth bore witness to a truth he couldn't ignore. Luke finally stopped at that fence. He placed his hand against the wooden slats. The old structure had withstood storms, blizzards, and even the slow decay of time. He realized it wasn't just a barrier, but a reminder of the dance between protection and vulnerability. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the world in shades of gold, he vowed to mend more than just the fence. He would strive to reclaim the beauty of nature and coexist in harmony with everything that graced his land. Yes, the fence had been breached, but in the end, it had taken it for an unforgettable lesson, a lesson carved deeply into the soil, as rich as the crops he tended. And so, with each strike of the hammer, Luke rebuilt his boundary, not just against the wild, but also against complacency. He recognized that true strength lay in understanding the wild things of this world. And deep within that understanding lay something transformative, a connection that would bind his fate to the land forevermore. The sun was barely up, draping a golden hue over the fields, when a sudden, ear-splitting crack shattered the morning stillness. Luke, the farmer, felt the jolt run through his chest as he dropped his morning coffee. He looked up just in time to see the wooden fence that had stood guard around his property for years splintering like the spine of an ancient tree. It was a breach, a fracture in the very wall that had kept his world safe. The deer were already moving, a torrent of brown and white, bounding through the gap with a grace that made even the most hardened of hearts skip a beat. They were wild, free, but more than anything, they were signaling chaos. Luke's heart raced. He had to act, but something held him back. Was it the sight of those deer, their eyes wide with fear, or was it the realization that something deeper was at play here? He shot out of the barn, thoughts boiling over as he grabbed a pitchfork clenched tightly in his hands like a sword from a forgotten era, the weight of it grounding him. But how could a mere pitchfork defend against the unbridled forces of nature? Just moments later, the rustle of leaves sent shivers down his spine. A growl gutted the silence. He turned toward the sound, panic rising like bile in his throat. Emerging from the woods like a shadow given life, a wolf stepped into the open, its eyes glimmering with the hunger of survival. The wolf's posture was relaxed yet predatory, embodying the wild energy that Luke had fought to keep at bay for so long. Each instinct screamed for him to retreat, to shield himself from the danger that lay just beyond the fence, but retreat was no option now. Behind him, he could still hear the thundering hooves of escaping deer, their instincts guiding them back toward safety, back toward him. But did they even know that safety was an illusion as old as the earth itself? Luke knew the truth all too well. For years, he had nurtured every plant that sprouted from the soil, coaxed life from every seed. But those seeds were not just crops. They were the tapestry of his existence, his livelihood, his love, and his legacy. Before he could fully process the situation, a second wolf joined the first, followed by two more. The fierce pack emerged as if choreographed, a unit in perfect synchronization. The landscape was suddenly alive with tension, the sweet fragrance of morning air mingling with the foul whiff of predator. Did the wolves know who they were up against? Did they care that all of Luke's hard work was on the line? In that moment of confrontation, Luke felt an unsettling mix of emotions wash over him. Fear, yes, but also something deeper, an awe for the primal beauty of the moment. Here was nature carving its path, a wild energy threatening everything he worked for, all while reminding him of the raw, unfiltered cycle of life. As the wolves scanned their surroundings, eyes locking onto him, Luke found himself faced not just with a threat to his land, but with the wrestling tension between civilization, safety, and the wild unknown. Suddenly, a low, haunting howl erupted from the pack, echoing through the air, sending a ripple of primal fear shivering down his spine. It was a call to action, a battle cry, and it shook him down to his very core. The immediate danger roared to life and his instincts kicked in. Without thinking, he raised the pitchfork high, a feeble attempt to project bravado, to stand firm against predators that had lived, hunted, and fought for their place long before he had ever tilled the first field. But then, in a flash, the forest erupted with movement. The deer were back more than just seeking safety. They were caught in a primal pull of fight or flight, a regular tale of life unfolding right before his eyes. For a moment, nature ceased to be an abstract threat. It became a primal force, compelling and earnest in its intentions. Luke thought back to his childhood. The stories told by his grandfather spoke of a connection to the land, a bond that was both delicate and fierce. He remembered the countless seasons watching new crops rise, the way the earth felt like a living, breathing entity. That deep-rooted understanding filled him with a calm he didn't know he needed. With every heartbeat echoing the rhythm of the wild, something shifted inside him. He was not just a farmer standing against the wolves. He was a steward of this land, part of the very ecosystem that surrounded him. Yes, he had built a fence to protect and safeguard, but perhaps walls, too, could sometimes limit understanding. Maybe the boundary he created was meant not just to keep wild things out, but also to veer them off a path of destruction. As the wolves lunged forward, jaws snapping, the deer scattered, but not all of them. Luke sprang into action, pushing past his own reservations, trusting a deeper instinct that whispered survival was collective, not solitary. With a swift motion, he began to shout words tumbling out, a cacophony of sound meant to unearth the primal energy vibrating beneath nature's surface. The wolves froze, confused by this unexpected intrusion. He knew he couldn't fight the wild, nor should he entirely. Perhaps there was a lesson hidden within this tumult, a reminder that he shared this land, that even through the chaos, he could exist alongside those fierce, free beasts. As he waved the pitchfork, his mind raced with ideas. Maybe there was a way to coexist without walls. Perhaps an understanding could be reached. Time slowed as the pitchfork became a blend of defiance and curiosity. With every step he took toward the wolves, something shifted. The very air around him felt charged, electric, as if nature itself held its breath. The wolves paused, their growls quieting, their suspicions lingering just a breath away. In that moment, Luke felt his fears ebb away. He steadied his voice, projecting calm with unexpected strength. "This is my land, but it belongs to you too," he called, feeling the sincerity wash over him. The words seemed an offering, a fragile bridge across a raging river cemented by trust and respect. Luke wasn't just a farmer now. He was a voice, a plea for harmony amidst chaos. But then, just as everything teetered on a fragile edge, a sudden commotion erupted from the woods. A larger, more confident figure emerged, a massive, ancient stag with antlers branching like the gnarled limbs of an oak. It stood tall, regal against the chaos, a figure of peace gasping for breath amidst violence. The stag knew instinctively that all of this, the deer, the wolves, this very standoff, was ancient. The wolves hesitated, their instincts fighting a silent battle. The air hummed with tension as the stag slowly tread forward, its eyes locked onto the fawn. And in that moment, as if directed by an unseen hand, the chaos dialed back. Luke watched, entranced, as the wild held the power to resolve itself. The deer settled behind the stag, using his strength as a sentinel, a protector against would-be predators. The ancient dance of life breathed on, shifting dynamics even without a spoken explanation. Luke felt a rush of gratitude, watching the wolves sit back on their haunches, studying the resistance still standing tall, giving them time to reconsider their hunger. Perhaps now, for just the briefest moment, they could see that instincts could shift not just toward what lay ahead, but back at the sanctuary that this land offered. It felt new yet timeless. The connection they shared in that moment was woven from understanding rather than fear. Then, as if sensing a window of opportunity closing, the wolves turned, retreating back toward the woods, the deer huddling closer to the stag, a collective sigh washing over them like a cool breeze easing the heat of a weary day. Luke remained, grounded on the edge of his property, feeling the weight of everything settle around him. He let the pitchfork drop to the ground, suddenly aware of how grotesque and unnatural it felt in this connection to the cycle of life. Turning his back to the ocean of trees, wildlife, and that long fence, he headed toward his home. He walked slowly, processing the enormity of what had just transpired. The fence may have been breached, but it had opened his eyes to a truth he had overlooked. He returned to his crops with a renewed sense of purpose. His land was no longer just a barrier against danger. It had transformed into a canvas upon which stories, his and theirs, would continue to unfold. Returning his gaze to the wild, he sensed not just an enemy lurking beyond the fence, but a neighbor, a family etched into the land's fabric, a community waiting, eager to coexist. The world outside wasn't just chaos. It was a reminder of balance, of the fragile yet fierce journey they were all on together. As clouds rolled in, casting long shadows over his fields, he started to envision ways to protect both his harvest and those wild hearts. They were kin in a grand tapestry, and now, the fence that once divided them would become something new, a partnership fueled by respect for what lay beyond each other's threshold. He picked up a hammer, determined not just to mend wood but to mend hearts, a mission that began that day. The fence was breached, yes, but for Luke, that breach had opened something much greater than he could ever imagine. It opened a door to understanding, to a world where boundaries were less about walls and more about the stories they nurtured, both wild and tame. The morning was hushed, the kind of stillness that layered anticipation in the air. Luke, the farmer, stood with his hands on his hips, surveying the patchwork of his land stretching before him. A great expanse of corn stood tall, swaying gently in the breeze as if whispering secrets to one another. The sun peeked over the horizon, illuminating the world in gold, but just beyond the edge of his property, something ominous waited. The fence, an old barricade of weathered wood, was as much a part of the landscape as the soil itself, a protector of crops, a guardian against the wild. Then, without warning, everything shifted. A deep rumble like distant thunder rolled through the field. Luke's heart thudded. He turned just in time to see the fence shudder, splitting near the middle with a loud crack that sent birds scattering into the sky. The wooden posts, once strong and resolute, splintered apart, exposing a gaping hole. In that instant, the world changed, and the very fabric of reality tore apart before his eyes. The deer, startled by the explosion of sound, bolted through the breach, their elegant bodies flowing like water over rock. The wild had found a way in, and Luke's mind raced as if it could outrun the chaos unfurling before him. He flinched, knowing what it meant. He grabbed a pitchfork, its cold metal feeling foreign in his hands. Panic surged within him. He had raised that fence to protect everything he loved, the crops, the livestock, the home he had built from sweat and years of labor. But the irony gripped him hard. It was not just the fence that was breached. Something deeper had slipped away, something he couldn't yet name. The deer flooded into his fields, their powerful legs pounding against the earth, leaving a trail of chaos in their wake. They were free now, unshackled by barriers, and Luke sensed the storm building, not just outside his fence, but within himself. Maybe it wasn't just about protecting what was his. Maybe it was about understanding the very essence of life surging through those wild creatures that now danced under the warming sun. The world seemed to hold its breath as he stepped forward, unsure of what his next move should be. He caught a glimpse of movement from the corner of his eye. From between the trees, shadows emerged, predatory, calculating. A low growl echoed, sending a chill racing down his spine. His attention snapped back to the breach. The wolves slipped from the underbrush with an eerie confidence, their sleek bodies gliding with purpose. They surveyed the land, their golden eyes scanning the chaos, reading the specifics of that frantic ballet between predator and prey. Luke's grip tightened around the pitchfork, and dread clotted in his throat. This was not just a fight for his crops. It was a confrontation with nature at its most raw and relentless. The wolves knew instinctually what they wanted. They were part of an age-old cycle, hungry and instinctive, made for this world where survival was paramount. Luke stood at a crossroads, torn between fear and an undeniable connection to the wild as his heart pounded against his chest like a drum announcing a battle. And then something incredible happened. Just as the wolves began to prowl forward, the largest deer turned. For a heartbeat, it paused, and Luke saw the determination in its eyes. This wasn't merely a flight from danger. It felt like a call to arms. In that moment, Luke felt time slow. Each heartbeat echoed the timeless dance of existence, the struggle, the fear, the will to live, binding him to these creatures. The deer, still frightened yet empowered by their pack mentality, surged forward, bolting toward the heart of his farmland, urging the rest to follow. The wolves, sensing opportunity, gave chase, and chaos erupted in a flurry of hooves and howls. Luke's voice broke the silence. He shouted, a cry born out of instinct. He raised the pitchfork higher, fingers digging into the wood, neither weapon nor shield, just an urgent projection of his will to protect. His call seemed to ripple through the ether, surprising him. Did he truly think he could command nature? Yet nature had its own plans. As if the earth conspired with him, Luke felt a primal urge rise within, an unfamiliar kinship emerging with the tumult of life around him. He wasn't just a guardian against the world. He was a participant in a grand, unwritten plan. The chase unfolded before him like a movie reel, frantic and surreal. The wolves lunged, teeth bared, but the deer were agile, the air charged with adrenaline. Luke found himself racing after them, a wild chorus echoing in his ears. Would he stand as a witness to this clash, or would he leap in to intervene? His thoughts felt scattered. In those fleeting moments, he recalled tales his grandfather told him, stories wrapped in the wisdom of the land. The heart of nature beats within us all, he had said, speaking of moments like this when survival hung in a delicate balance. The patterns of predator and prey kept the world spinning, and here Luke was, standing on the brink of it all. With a surge of instinct, he lunged closer, calling out again. Hey! It was both a plea and a command, reverberating through the heavy air. The wolves hesitated, their instincts clashing against the need to pursue what was swiftly fleeing. The deer glanced back at him, and in that shared glance, fierce yet vulnerable, he felt an inexplicable connection. Then, as the pack turned toward him, confusion mingled with their hunger. The alpha wolf, bold and powerful, stepped forward, and Luke felt a mixture of fear and awe. The animal was no beast to be trifled with. It was life incarnate, bred from the cycle of existence. Luke understood this instinctively, the vulnerable awareness of life's intricate web unfurling before them all. Then there it was. The ancient stag emerged, breaking through the trees with a strength and grace that silenced the chaos. It stood tall, antlers reaching toward the sky, radiating authority. The moment shifted once more and the pack faltered. Luke marveled at the scene unfolding, a reminder that nature found balance, that a stillness could be made from chaos. The stag let out a deep, resonating call, a challenge. He moved close to Luke, seemingly recognizing the strange bond they shared, a mutual understanding of territory. For a second, Luke held his breath, entranced by the raw power of it all, the unexpected alliance forged in the heart of crisis. With a crack of thunder and a flash of lightning, tension broke. The wolves, sensing the powerful figure before them, began to retreat. Luke broadened his stance, feeling the weight of their collective battle fold into acceptance. The air thickened with the promise of what could be, an acknowledgement that this land belonged to all of them. And then, as the last vestiges of chaos began to disperse, Luke felt weight lift from his shoulders. They were tied to one another, the wild and the cultivated, through life and conflict. It was an understanding so profound that it surged through him with urgency. As wolves melted back into the shadows, the deer settled down, still jittery but reassured by the presence of their leader, the ancient stag. Luke lowered the pitchfork and, with a deep sigh, relished in the relief of stillness that replaced the frantic drumming of chaos. The fence had been breached, yes, but rather than mark loss, it had revealed an incredible insight. That moment had deepened his bond with the land, with the creatures that called it home. It was no longer just about protecting what was his. It was about learning to exist alongside the wild energies that intertwined through everything. And so, as shadows lengthened with the setting sun, Luke walked back to his farm. Each step felt lighter, free from the weight of isolation that had gripped him. He would repair the fence, surely, but it wasn't just about wood or iron. It was about how he would rebuild the relationship with the world outside those boundaries. He noticed the sun casting long shadows, igniting the land in hues of orange and gold. He envisioned planting crops that not only fed him, but also nurtured the very spirits of the wild plants that would harmonize with the rhythm of life all around him. Behind him, the stag led the herd back to the woods, regal and protective. Luke felt a flicker of hope, a promise for tomorrow, for a future bred in understanding and kinship. Nature had shown him that barriers were not just walls. They could also act as bridges and passages, if only he dared to embrace them. Strengthened by the lessons learned that day, he stepped onto the earth, cradling the sacred understanding of life entwined in a fragile balance. The breaches had changed everything, but perhaps, just perhaps, they had opened a new world filled with endless possibilities. And in that realization, he found something far more valuable than mere safety. He found belonging, right at the heart of the wild. The sun hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over an otherwise ordinary morning. A sudden tremor ripped through the stillness, echoing across the sprawling fields of Luke's farm. It started as a deep rumbling, then crescendoed into a violent crack. The old wooden fence that had stood for years, a stalwart guardian against the wild, splintered apart, creating a wide gap that seemed to breathe life into the surrounding chaos. Luke stood frozen, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. He knew instinctively that the moment had arrived. His breath caught in his throat. How many times had he repaired that fence? How many times had he counted on it to keep the predators at bay? But here it was breached. The wild was rushing in, and with it, a surge of uncertainty ran through him. The first to break through were the deer, sleek and graceful, bounding through the opening as if they were spirits set free. Their eyes darted with a mixture of fear and exhilaration, their powerful legs stretching to their limits as they took flight across the green fields. Luke's instincts kicked in. He shoved aside his shock and raced toward the gap, pitchfork in hand, mind swirling with images of what else could come rushing in. He knew coyotes roamed these parts and that foxes often prowled for easy prey. This wasn't just a breach in a fence, it was a fracture in safety itself. As he neared the fence, he heard a low growl reverberating from the woods behind him. Luke turned his head just in time to catch a glimpse of wolves, sleek, feral, and utterly unrepentant. Their golden eyes shone like polished brass, locking onto the circulation of chaos where the deer now fled. Luke's heart sank. His throat tightened as he realized the animals he had tried so hard to keep at bay were now closer than ever. The wolves fanned out, moving with an elegant precision that came only from generations of living wild. The pack moved like shadows, knowing the land intimately, every tuft of grass and gnarled tree. They were drawn into his arena, a stage forged from sweat, toil, and loneliness. The stakes were high, and Luke was left standing on the precipice, caught between worlds, the world of the tame, where order reigned, and the world of the wild, where instinct held sway. He could feel the wind shift, a tangible burst of energy crackling in the air. Refusing to dwell on fear, he took a deep breath, planting his feet into the earth. This wasn't merely a test of physical strength, it was a test of spirit. He knew he needed to protect his land not just out of duty, but out of love. In a rush, the first wolf lunged forward, its instincts primed for a chase, its body taut like a bowstring ready to snap. Luke shouted, his voice breaking through the tension, echoing across the field. But his words seemed lost in the chaos of the moment. The lead deer, bold and fierce, turned to face the oncoming threat. It stood its ground, eyes blazing like two fiery orbs, a war cry echoing from deep within its chest. The rhythmic pounding of hooves filled the air as the wild hung in perfect balance, a mixed choreography of survival. Luke, watching this raw spectacle unfold, felt something shift inside him. The emotional turmoil that churned within him coalesced into a fierce determination. He was more than just a farmer. He was part of this ancient rhythm of life. History coursed through him, an unspoken bond tied to generations who had stood before the wild, facing down the chaos that surged toward them. He gripped the pitchfork like a sword, a weapon born from need and purpose. The deer rallied behind the lead stag, their instincts driving them to protect their own. The wolf's advance faltered, confusion flickering across its face as it observed this curious mingling of man and nature, a standoff like no other. Luke felt his heart race as adrenaline surged through him, and in that moment the world outside the fence felt both dangerous and liberating. But the wolves were relentless. Another howled, a haunting cry that cut through the air, rallying the pack to press on. Their urge to hunt was palpable, instinctive, and deeply rooted in the very essence of existence. Luke's voice met theirs, primal and fierce, urging back the tide of chaos, the wild spirit intertwined with his own. And then, as if summoned from the depths of the ancient tales his grandfather used to tell him, a massive stag emerged from the shelter of trees. It was old and regal, antlers sprawling like the branches of a weathered oak, a symbol of strength and wisdom. The stag stepped forward, exuding a quiet authority that calmed the seething chaos around it. The wolves hesitated, momentarily caught off guard by this new force. Luke's heart soared as he recognized the incredible moment unfolding. The deer shifted slightly, standing behind the stag, emboldened by its presence. It stood as a bulwark against the oncoming storm. Luke's breath caught. He was witnessing a confrontation that had played out for centuries, an ancient dance between predator and prey. His heart swelled with awe at the beauty of life, how raw, how visceral it was in those fleeting moments. And yet, a reminder echoed within him. This wasn't just nature's majesty, it was also a battle for survival. A thin thread held everything together, stretching taut between life and death. He found himself stepping back, letting the stag take the helm of the situation. The wolves, faced with the dignified presence of the antlered beast, now lacked focus. They paced, sizing up their surroundings, but something shifted. Fear snaked into their hearts. Luke felt the air shift, heavy with unsaid words and desperate instincts. This dance was as much about respect as it was about survival. It wasn't just the wolves versus the deer. It was a mirrored reflection of units, groups, communities battling for their right to exist. The stag lowered its head, prominently showing its antlers as an offering of strength. Luke understood. This wasn't a moment merely of conflict. It was an opportunity for harmony, an echo of understanding that coursed through the fabric of the land. Everything interconnected. The wolves backed down, sensing the weight of the moment, stepping back into the shadows from whence they came. A collective sigh seemed to wash over the field as the tension released. The deer gathered themselves, realizing they had survived and now stood victorious. They had faced their predators not just with fear but with honest ferocity. Luke found himself breathing deeply, a flood of relief mingling with residual adrenaline. What had been chaos mere moments before now felt like an incredible display of the natural order. He stood there in awe, absorbing the proof that even in conflict, there lay the seeds of cooperation, coexistence, and life itself. But he felt the need to act quickly, to mend what had been broken. The fence remained an opening, a reminder of the distant lines drawn between wild and tame, but that day had shown him a new perspective. He walked toward the gap, the pitchfork now lowered to his side, feeling a strong sense of purpose. As he began to assess the damage, he contemplated his relationship with the land. It had transformed overnight in mere moments of tension between predator and prey. The fence had served its purpose for so long, but now he knew it could become something more. With determination, Luke rolled up his sleeves, ready to put in the work, ready to mend not just wood, but the understanding of balance. No more would he see the wild as a threat. He would embrace it, weave it into the tapestry of life on his farm. He gathered materials, hammer and nails, wood not just as barriers, but as bridges connecting two worlds. As he worked, the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields. The environment felt alive, vibrant. Life burst around him, echoing the very chaos he had feared. He realized that his farm was more than just rows of crops. It was a living community, a delicate ecosystem. The deer, the wolves, and even the stag were part of his story, and he wanted to embrace that. Mending the fence was not merely about protection. It was about creating passages, understanding, and fostering a coexistence. As night began to cloak the landscape, stars flickered into view, and Luke stepped back to survey his work, resting a hand on a post. Each nail driven into place was infused with intention, creating a blend of security and openness, a new kind of boundary that embraced the wild around him while still safeguarding what mattered. Tomorrow, he would rise to face the day with renewed clarity. The fence remained a structure, but now it was a reminder that relationships could be mended just as easily. Less of a barrier and more of a commitment and offering to share the land, the harvest, and the stories that played out under the vast dome of the sky. He turned back to the vast expanse of the land, feeling a connection to all the threads that wove through existence, the pulse of life, the breath of earth, the spirit of the wild. The fence had been breached that day, yes, but it had also opened his heart and mind to the greater lesson of coexistence. And in that simple truth, he found a power that transcended any fence he could ever build. Tonight, sleep would come easy, knowing he had taken a step forward, not just as a farmer, but as a steward of life. The morning was quiet, yet a storm brewed in the air, a tension that hung heavy and thick like an impending rain. Luke, the farmer, stood by the edge of his field, surveying his land with a familiar mix of pride and anxiety. The crops shimmered under the morning sun, rows of corn standing tall and ready for harvest. But something felt off. Then, without warning, a loud crack echoed across the pasture, snapping the tranquility in two. Luke's heart sank as he turned to see his wooden fence shatter like glass. The wind howled through the breach, violently tearing apart the comfort of something that had protected his crops for years. His instincts flared to life, and adrenaline surged through his veins. In an instant, he knew the world around him was about to change. Before he could even comprehend the chaos, the first wave of deer burst through the gap. They were wild, elegant creatures, flowing freely like a river escaping its dam. Luke froze for a heartbeat, watching their frantic escape, then stumbled into action. He couldn't afford to let them scatter unchecked. His land was his livelihood, and chaos was the last thing he needed. He grabbed a pitchfork, feeling the weight of it in his hands, a weak but symbolic weapon against the storm brewing behind him. As he hurried toward the fence, he could see movement in the distance, a line of wolves weaving through the underbrush, their golden eyes glinting with a predatory hunger. Panic flooded his mind. The fence had been a barrier, a fragile wall separating his cultivated existence from the untamed world beyond. Now, that wall had crumbled, and with it came the furious rush of instinct and instinctual violence. But they seemed unfazed, their focus locked onto the fleeing deer, their instincts driving them forward with single-minded determination. They were the embodiment of nature's raw power, a force no amount of shouting could halt. He watched in horror as the first deer collided with the edge of his cornfield, darting through rows of crops, frantic and scared. It was a beautiful creature, glistening in the light, but now it was a wild card, part of a game that felt all too dangerous. The wolves trailed close behind, eyes sharp and cunning. He needed to intervene, to protect his land from becoming their hunting ground. In that moment of frantic energy, Luke remembered the teachings whispered to him as a child, a connection to the rhythms of nature that had always been part of his family's legacy. The wolves had their place in this hierarchy, just as he did. This knowledge flickered through his mind, but the urgency of the situation drowned it out. A sense of purpose welled up inside him, a fierce recognition that he had to act. The pitchfork became an extension of his will, fired by instinct and fear. He surged forward, clenching the tool tightly, breathing heavy as he stumbled toward the chaos. His heart raced, terror thrumming in time with desperation. Within moments, the battle began in earnest. The wolves were fierce, moving in close, teeth bared, salivating at the thought of an easy meal. Luke shouted again, louder this time, hoping to disrupt their chase as deer dashed past him, struggling to find refuge in the familiar confines of his fields. The scene felt surreal, as if he had stepped into a primal dance of life and death. One of the deer stumbled, its legs faltering just enough to put it in the line of danger. Luke's stomach dropped. The wolves honed in like missiles, their bodies poised to strike. It was then that he understood everything, the fear radiating from the doe, the excitement coursing through the wolves, and his own desperate need to protect what was his. Without hesitation, he brandished the pitchfork, wielding it like a sword as he charged forward. The wolves glanced toward him, confusion flickering in their eyes. For a brief moment, the primal chaos paused, weaving a thread of awareness amidst the chaos. It was a lifeline that connected the wild and the cultivated, a strange formality that held the power of ancient instincts within it. Just then, the alpha wolf stepped forward from the pack, its stance stretching tall and confident. This wolf was a literary figure from the stories of old, a creature carrying the weight of the wild in its stance. It assessed Luke, blue eyes gleaming with a mixture of curiosity and challenge. In that fleeting second, man and beast engaged in a game of resolve, a competition grounded in the essence of survival. "I won't let you take them," Luke yelled, his voice breaking through the tension that held the moment suspended. As a farmer, he had faced countless challenges, but this moment was different. It was where instinct met survival, where nature entwined with humanity. The animals hesitated, all caught up in the overlapping drama. The ancient dance of predator and prey played out before him, marked by an unyielding rhythm defined by fear and instinct. Behind him, the remainder of the deer had gathered. They were terrified yet united. They formed a living wall of determination against the chaos surging toward them. The alpha wolf remained fixated on Luke, understanding the implications of this strange standoff. It echoed the age-old battle lines drawn in the dirt, between the wild and the cultivated, between survival and protection. But as that moment unfurled, something shifted within Luke. He wasn't merely a farmer defending his crops. He was a part of the landscape, bound to both the wild and his fields. Another deer broke free from the group and sprinted ahead, creating a distraction. In an instant, the wolves shifted their focus, darting toward the fleeing creature. Luke took a single step forward, feeling both fear and defiance coursing through him. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everything, the line between man and beast, the legacy of generations, the pulse of life itself. But the chase had taken its toll. Suddenly, the lead deer found itself cornered, and in that moment of vulnerability, all the layers of tension fell away. With one swift motion, the lead wolf pounced, but it was also simultaneous. Luke lunged, pitchfork extended toward the ground and striking the earth with a thunderous thud. And in that split second, a wave of silence washed over the chaos. The noise of the wild dulled, and time seemed to freeze. The deer stared wide-eyed, the wolf faltered, and Luke's heart pounded so hard he thought it might explode. It was surrendering to fear, defying it, embodying both the hunter and the hunted. Finally, the stag stepped from the shadows, majestic in its presence. Its antlers reached toward the sky, and another energy filled the space between them. Luke saw the wild unlock a protective front, a sense of guardianship radiating from that mighty creature. It faced the wolves, standing tall 9 feet high, a living monument of strength. The alpha wolf studied the stag for a moment before pulling back, realizing the fight was no longer just with Luke. It was a perplexing dance of survival where conflict met a fortified defense, one that nature recognized and honored. Then, Luke felt something shift deep within him, a primal understanding that merged human with wild, farmer with nature. A lesson, carved and embedded in his insecurities, flourished there was power in unity, in respect for the cycles of life that threaded everything together. The wolves, having assessed their surroundings, began to retreat. Luke could hardly believe his eyes. They melted back into the shadows, backing away as if refusing to let the tension pool further. As darkness began to stretch across the landscape, the energy shifted from frantic to reflective. The stag remained vigilant, a protector of those smaller creatures now finding their footing. In that moment, Luke understood the depth of a receding tide. The wild was not merely an adversary. It was a part of the fabric of life, contoured by instinct, woven with time. Finally, the wolves turned and disappeared into the forest, leaving the field silent. Luke stood there, breathless, every heartbeat thundering as he faced the aftermath. He observed the deer slowly returning to their senses, nudging each other in a collective sigh of relief, then gathering around the stag. The fear that had gripped their hearts began to ebb away, replaced by an unspoken gratitude for the force that had bridged the gap between them. His farm had been the stage for this dramatic ballet of instinct versus survival, but the experience altered his view of life forever. The fence, though damaged, was a reminder. A symbol not just of protection, but of the lessons that awaited, stitched into the soil of every inch he tended. After gathering his thoughts, Luke knew he must embrace the cycle of life, however harsh it may seem. With trembling hands, he pledged to rebuild the fence, not just as a structure of wood and nails, but as a symbol of commitment to both his crops and the wilder creatures that roamed nearby. He worked until the stars shone down upon him, their distant light weaving narratives into the fabric of night. He would mend the breach, of course, but now it would be strengthened by the understanding that life thrived beyond boundaries. Tomorrow would come, and with it a sunrise that bathed the world golden. Luke would rise with it, intent on mending the land but also nurturing a deeper bond with nature. The fence would be repaired, yes, but it would also hang loose, open to the wild that lived alongside him, a dance between chaos and cultivation. The lessons learned remained etched in his heart. Whispered around the field's life was a vast tapestry, woven together from the threads of predator and prey, man and nature, chaos and understanding. The fence had been breached, but in its breaking, it had forged new pathways, inviting him to engage with the world in a symphony of life. And as he stood under the stars, a deep sense of gratitude anchored him. He was part of this intricate dance, an embrace of both the wild and the tame. It was a reminder and invitation to step beyond fear and towards coexistence, something beautiful rising from the fracture that had come so perilously close to chaos. In that depth of understanding lay the true beauty of life, an endless journey guiding him forward, binding him to the cycle of everything that lived beyond his fields. A piercing crack shattered the calm of the early morning. It reverberated through the fields, causing everything to still for a moment. Luke the farmer dropped his cup of coffee, its contents staining the ground. He glanced up just in time to see the long wooden fence that had bordered his property fracture, splinters flying like arrows as a gust of wind erupted through the gap. His heart raced. The fence had been a stronghold, a barrier to keep out not just wildlife, but also the chaos that came with it. Now, with that sudden breach, everything felt uncertain, as if the world around him had shifted on its axis. He turned to see movement, a wave of deer bobbing through the splintered remains of the fence, their eyes wide with fear and exhilaration. In an instant, instinct kicked in. Luke grabbed a pitchfork, its metal glinting in the sunlight, and sprinted toward the opening. He couldn't let the deer scatter unchecked. He had to regain control. His crops were ripe for harvest, and the wild was closing in. Just as he reached the fence, a low growl echoed from the woodlands behind him. He froze, an icy rush coursing through him. Emerging from the shadows, sleek and powerful, were wolves. Their movements were fluid, confident, predatory. Luke's grip tightened around the pitchfork. While he had faced storms and drought, nothing had ever felt as primal as this. He was standing on the edge of a dance as old as time itself, the clash of predator and prey. As the deer darted away, Luke could hear the shuffling of the pack behind him. They were hungry and restless, driven by survival. His adrenaline surged. The fence wasn't just a physical structure. It was a line between his cultivated existence and the wild, and now that line had been erased. He shouted, hoping to break the focus of the wolves, but his voice was lost in the cacophony of nature, the wind and sound of pounding hooves. They charged forward, fierce and relentless, and he realized he wasn't just fighting to save the crops. He was fighting for the very essence of life growing against the odds. He charged forward, pitchfork raised, heart pounding, a mix of fury and fear coursing wildly through his veins. The lead wolf paused, eyes narrowing as they locked onto him, sensing his determination. In that fleeting moment, Luke felt a flicker of understanding. This was not just chaos, it was instinct meeting instinct, a standoff where life and death danced in a delicate balance. The first deer stumbled, its legs faltering as it realized the danger was hot on its heels. Luke yelled, rushing forward, pitchfork ready to shield not just the deer but everything he had built. The wolves closed in, excitement rippling through the pack. Their instincts ignited the air around them, turning it electric. But then, in the midst of his desperation, he noticed something extraordinary. The lead deer turned to face its pursuers, standing its ground against the approaching pack. There was strength in that creature, a fierce defiance that radiated through the chaos. In a heartbeat, the wild became a reflection of Luke's own inner battle. He wasn't just defending what he had. He was confronting fear, overcoming a primal instinct to retreat. And the deer rallied behind their leader. The pack faltered, caught off guard by this sudden display of unity. Luke could feel the energy shift, the pulse of life thrumming wildly, binding them in a tapestry of determination. This wasn't merely a fight, it was survival, resonating through every creature present. But just then he caught movement from the corner of his eye. An enormous stag burst through the underbrush, regal and commanding. It stood tall, antlers stretched wide against the backdrop of the chaos. The air felt heavy with tension, but in its presence there was an unexpected calm. The wolves hesitated, drawn to the stag's strength, a natural king among creatures. Luke observed, breathless, as that quiet power disrupted the frantic energy surrounding them. The stag turned to the deer, its gaze urging them to stand firm. For that moment, everything shifted. No longer were they just individual creatures. They were part of a community woven into the fabric of the land. Luke felt his heart swell, realizing he was part of this dance, too. The wild and the cultivated overlaid, synchronized in this fragile moment. The wolves retreated, sensing the strength of the stag. Nature had spoken, and its authority fell heavy upon all. The alpha wolf glanced back, wild intelligence flashing in its gaze. It assessed the situation, realizing its chances of success were fading. In one swift motion, the pack began to back away, retreating into the shadows from whence they had come. As silence settled over the fields, the tension hung like morning mist, but Luke saw courage reflected in the eyes of the deer. The stag remained rooted, anchoring them, a sentinel against the night. Luke lowered his pitchfork, breath hitching in his throat. What had begun as chaos had transformed into a profound realization of connection, bridging the gap between the wild and the tame. He felt an overwhelming rush of gratitude, not just for the animals, but for the wild lessons they had imparted. This land was a tapestry of stories, woven together by survival instinct, a reminder of the delicate balance that held everything in place. He was a steward, not just a farmer, and his relationship with the land required more than fences and barriers. It needed understanding. With each passing moment, the sun slipped lower in the sky, trailing smudgy hues of orange and pink. Luke quietly approached the gap in the fence, standing before the remnants of what once stood proud. It had been a divider, but now it was a reminder of the vulnerabilities in life, a symbol of connectivity rather than isolation. As dusk began to settle, he resolved to repair the fence, not just mending wood, but re-establishing his place in the ecosystem around him. He felt the weight of the responsibility more profoundly than ever before. This was a dance he could not only join but also nurture. It meant respecting the raw power of nature while protecting the life he had built. That evening, as he worked to repair the fence, he contemplated how to integrate the wild spirit into his world. Perhaps he could create pathways, gaps in the wood that fostered growth and connectivity, welcoming the beauty of the wilderness instead of isolating it. He envisioned scenes where deer could roam freely, coexisting rather than being forced in or out. The fence would still stand, but it would serve a purpose anew. As he hammered the first nail back into place, he felt lighter, aware that his efforts transcended mere labor. They spoke of a commitment to harmony. Tonight, he realized beyond the boundaries of what separated them. Life thrived in bold colors against the canvas of the earth. He looked back at the fields as shadows crept around, feeling gratitude wash over him. There was an unspoken promise growing between him and the wild. Luke worked late into the night, breathing in the sense of the soil, feeling the heartbeat of the land echo through his fingers as he secured every inch of the fence. He knew the real beauty lay in fostering relationships, in allowing the wild to shape each season, just as he had shaped the land through hard work and dedication. Each piece of wood he reinforced whispered stories of connection days steeped in sunlight and nights calm under a blanket of stars. With every blow of the hammer, he embraced a commitment to coexistence, to weaving the rich tapestry of life together, thread by thread. When morning light broke over the horizon, spilling gold across the fields, Luke stood back and gazed at the fence, now robust yet inviting. He had crafted more than just a physical barrier. He had formed a partnership with the land and its creatures. With renewed purpose and strength, he strode through the fields, down a path lined with the vibrant greens of his crops, remembering the beauty of that chaotic morning. He smiled as he thought of the stag, the deer, and the wolves. Their dance mirrored his life, threading his existence together with theirs, bringing forth a philosophy of respect and understanding. It's in moments of tension and chaos that life's greatest truths become visible. The breach had led him down a path of discovery, showing him the delicate balance linking the wild and cultivated, revealing that strength could be found in harmony. And as Luke surveyed his farm, he felt a powerful connection and intertwining of lives, where all creatures had a role in the grand narrative unfolding across the landscape. The fence had been breached, yes, but from that breach emerged a new understanding, a journey toward deeper connection and profound respect, where the farmer and the wild could not only coexist but thrive together. With each dawn rising over the horizon, Luke would continue to weave those threads together, honoring both the beauty of cultivation and the wild. The fragile dance of existence, where predators and prey could find their footing side by side, became a testament to the richness of life, boundless and vibrant, echoing through the fields forever. The early morning sun cast long shadows over the fields when it happened. Luke, the farmer, stood at the edge of his property, securing his gloves as he prepared for the day. Suddenly, the ground trembled, but it wasn't an earthquake. It was the old wooden fence cracking like a whip, collapsing under a sudden burst of force. The sharp sound pierced the morning calm, sending a jolt through Luke's body. He turned, a knot tightening in his stomach. The fence had been a protective barrier for years, a fortress that kept the wild things at bay. But now, as Luke watched in horror, the wooden slats splintered and fell apart, revealing a gaping hole that opened to the unknown. Just beyond it, a herd of deer was caught mid-graze, their eyes wide with panic. They bolted toward the breach, leaping through the broken fence like spirits escaping confinement. But that was just the beginning. Luke realized he had to act fast. The deer weren't the only creatures that would be tempted by this newfound passage. His heart raced as he envisioned coyotes and worse, a pack of hungry wolves. He sprinted toward the breach, pitchfork in hand, feeling the weight of every moment pressing down on him. He could see the wild creeping closer, lurking just beyond the trees. As the last of the deer dashed through the broken fence, Luke barely caught a glimpse of shadows moving among the trees. A dozen wolves, sleek and dangerous. Their golden eyes glinted in the sunlight, scanning the chaos. He had prepared for storms, droughts, and even the odd raccoon pilfering apples from the orchard, but nothing could have braced him for this. His grip tightened around the pitchfork. He could almost feel the prickle of fear darting up his spine. His instincts kicked in. He wasn't just defending his crops, he was fighting for everything he and his family had built. The wild was closing in. He had to protect his land, his legacy. He shouted, his voice raw and powerful, echoing through the stillness of the morning. He moved closer to the breach, lungs burning as he shouted again, hoping to disrupt the pack's focus. The wolves paused, eyes locked onto him, calculating, sizing him up. The air was electric, charged with the tension of predator and prey. They were beautiful and terrifying at once. The lead wolf stepped forward, its stance assertive, its muscles rippling beneath its sleek fur. Luke's mind raced. He felt like he was at the edge of two worlds, caught between the life he had created and the raw instincts of the wild. In that moment, everything around him faded away. It was just him, the wolves, and the chaos swirling in the air. Just then, movement at the far end of the field caught his eye. He turned to see a massive stag, powerful and regal, stepping out of the woodlands. It exuded an aura of authority, antlers sharp and high, as if it ruled the very ground beneath its hooves. The stag pawed the earth, calling those belonging to its kind to gather. Luke's heart quickened as he watched the deer, emboldened by their leader, regrouping behind the stag. Luke felt something shift within him, a spark of courage igniting. This was not just about protecting his land, it was a moment of truth that intertwined their fates. He wasn't facing just wild creatures, he was confronting an instinctive cycle. He took a deep breath, steadying himself, realizing he was part of this vast tapestry of life. He bellowed, his voice booming across the field, merging with the heartbeats of the creatures around him. The deer settled down, forming a united front behind the stag. They huddled together, driven by a primal urge to protect one another against the encroaching threat. For a moment, the wolves hesitated, caught off guard by the unexpected display of unity from the deer. The lead wolf seemed to consider its options, narrowing its gaze, eyeing Luke with an intelligence that sent shivers down his spine. Luke brandished his pitchfork, more symbol than weapon now, realizing he was not just defending crops but also standing up for a community of life surrounding him. But the standoff didn't last long. With a sudden burst of energy, the lead wolf snarled and lunged forward, prompting the rest of the pack to follow. The deer scattered, panic igniting their instincts as they ran in wild, chaotic circles. Luke yelled, his heart pounding. In that moment, time slowed, and he could feel every bead of sweat trickling down his back. The clash of chaos was like thunder booming in his ears, and he charged forward, swinging the pitchfork toward the air. A different kind of thrill surged through him. It wasn't just a visceral need to protect. It was a realization of his place within this story. As the wolves hurtled closer, he yelled again, channeling the spirit of all his ancestors who had ever stood their ground against the wild. He shouted one last time, his voice a war cry that seemed to echo through the ages. The pitchfork blurred in motion, not as a weapon but as a defiant proclamation. And then, just as the wolves closed in, another unexpected force emerged from the woods. A second stag, equally as large, appeared alongside the first as if summoned by an unseen hand, their presence turning the tide of chaos into something far more profound. They stood shoulder to shoulder, unyielding, a united wall of untamed strength. The lead wolf paused, taking a step backward, assessing the dual threat. Luke's heart raced in his chest, the tension of the moment pulling the air taut. For every instinct that drove the wolves forward, there was an equally powerful instinct holding the stags firm. Then came another roar, a primal sound that sent tremors through the earth. Luke felt it deep in his bones, reverberating through the air. The wolves, momentarily caught in the grip of fear, began to retreat, their eyes darting between the stags and the farmers, mistrust tugging at their instincts. But as the wolves pulled back, the situation was still dire. Their retreat did not signal the end of the threat. Rather, it revealed a moment of balance. Luke felt the line between order and chaos shift, and in that shift, possibility ignited. The stags stepped forward, their majestic bodies commanding reverence. Luke could feel a thread of understanding weaving between him and the wild. The dance of life unfolded like a story written long ago, one that recounted generations of struggle and survival. But then, just as he began to breathe a sigh of relief, a sudden rustle broke the tension. From the dense thicket, another shadow emerged. This time, it was not a deer nor a stag, it was larger and darker, moving with purposeful grace. Luke squinted, heart racing as he recognized the creature stalking from the underbrush. A massive wolf, older than the rest, emerged, its gaze sharp and wary. Every furrow in its face told stories of survival, battles lost and won. It stepped forward, slowing the chaotic dance of the moment. The alpha wolf, emboldened by the arrival of its elder, stepped back but remained within striking distance. Luke could feel the wolves regrouping, a sense of danger creeping back into the air. He had thought they were retreating, but it turned out they were merely repositioning. The balance he had felt mere moments before hung precariously, weighted down by the surge of instincts swirling around them. With a deep breath, Luke tightened his grip on the pitchfork once more. He could sense the energy ramping up, a potent reminder that the wild does not yield easily. The magic of that moment of connection was about to be tested. Luke whispered to himself, feeling the pulse of every creature around him. He understood the stakes, recognized the raw energy coursing through the wildness of it all. It was a raw, visceral confrontation, life, death, community, and survival entwined in the heart of the field. As the alpha raised its head, letting out a growl that echoed through the sunlit air, Luke saw the other wolves inching closer, their movements synchronized, eyes filled with determination. The deer gathered, trembling yet steadfast, their instincts igniting in fierce unity. In that split second, everything coalesced into clarity. This was the ancient story, one that transcended simple barriers between man and beast. Luke stood there, a man among creatures, caught in the tempest of life unfolding around him. And then, with a shattering surge, the wolves charged forward again, a tide of shadows racing toward him. Suddenly, he felt the ground beneath him tremble. Instinct kicked in as he swung the pitchfork wide, shouting as the chaos erupted around him. But would it be enough? Would he be able to protect his land, his family? Or would this be the moment where everything he held dear slipped through his fingers? The plunge into the unknown loomed before him, the raw energy of pursuit and instinct erupting in a symphony of chaos. Time itself felt suspended as the first wolf leaped forward, fangs bared, eyes locked on the prize. And in that moment, the only thought that surged through Luke's mind was the primal realization that the wild had come for him.